All right, so welcome back, everybody. We're here with Ask the Collective, episode 3. My name is Rich Brubaker, and I'm the founder of Collective Responsibility, and it's really great to have you back for another episode. We're going to be changing up the format a little bit and adding a little bit more spice to our questions, so we hope that you enjoy this round. And again, please subscribe, share with your friends, and ask questions, because questions are what we're living off of for this series. So with that, we're going to get to the first question.
Bryan Stadelmann asks, Substandard oil refining causes much of China's air pollution. Chinese officials are well informed in this matter. Why wasn't this the very first target? This would be a very localized investment/undertaking with nationwide positive repercussions.
So Bryan, this is a great question, and logically, yes, there's some sense in the fact that they should be going after this specific emitter or energy supply. Just like with coal, diesel, and petrol, these are energy sources run by the largest state-owned enterprise. They're very powerful organizations, and depending upon the report that you read, they may be just as powerful as government ministers themselves. So that's why I think, yes, it is a very localized source. It's something that at the city, provincial, or nationwide government they could go after. And actually what you're starting to see is that these changes are starting to happen from a regulatory standpoint. But then from an enforcement standpoint, this is always China's challenge, is how can you get this to happen, not just in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, where a lot of actions at the local level have already been taken because the cities are already growing in wealth, but how can that spread out? And this is where at the national level, the government itself has to work out a way within the state-owned enterprises to get them to do a system-wide change. And I think this is the barrier. One, it's political. Two, it's economic, because once you put those investments in and you drive the price of energy up, it's not just the energy giants that are going to be complaining about their profit margin. It's going to be logistics firms, it's going to be average drivers, it's going to be a lot of participants who are unhappy about the increased cost, particularly in a weak economy where they're already worried about cost. So my feeling is that you're starting to see a lot of the bricks being put into place. The mortar still needs to come together, but over time, this is certainly something that they will be looking at going forward.
Viv Wang asks, given that the government is now considering ways to exert a more direct form of influence over the country's online media institutions, how will you get around the issue of directly reporting current affairs and social commentary as it's being banned?
So this is potentially a lightning rod to answer, or it's an opportunity to engage. And I think that's the truth with any of this, Vivian. I mean, we've been operating here for a number of years, and a lot of people say, well, we're in a sensitive area. But the reality is, if you get away from the hyperbole, you get away from blaming, you get away from shaming the government into what they're not doing, and you start focusing on, one, either what they're doing, or two, the opportunities to collaborate to solve problems. You focus on the work, then actually a lot of the risk starts to fade away. You can have honest conversations, you can have proactive discussions, but what you can't have is, you're wrong, it's their fault, it's got to be the government that fixes it. I don't think it's about why can't we say anything, because that's not the case. You can talk, and you see a lot of active discussions in Chinese, not just in English, but in Chinese occurring. The question is the intent and the angle and the expectations of return. If you're just there to whine and complain about the smog being bad while you're turning on every light in your house, you're leaving your air conditioning on all day, that's one thing. But if you're saying, hey, this is a challenge and I'd like to work together, or I would like to bring together a nonprofit and a technology for a solution, you can still have those conversations. So for me, if what you're saying has value, if it's solution driven, and if it's non-confrontational, you can still have great, honest discussions about real challenges.
Catherine Hodgson said, hi, I wonder what the average size of a single corporate donation is in China.
Catherine, this is a really interesting one, and there's a few kind of generations of this question. When I first started working within philanthropy and CSR in the early 2000s, the average Chinese donation was actually very small, but it'd be once a year, and it would be a larger donation once a year, so 100,000, a million, maybe more, depending upon what the donor would receive in return. So it's actually a time I call it quid pro quo philanthropy. You knew what you were getting the moment you picked up the phone call for how much you would give to that person. And you just made a decision, a business decision. Will I get the media hits? Will I meet the mayor? Will I get what I need? And what's the cost for that? Over time, that's switched. And what we're seeing is actually, from the Chinese side, the donations are growing, but they're also, in terms of an overall top line number, but the number of activities and the size of each donation is getting smaller and more frequent. And that's partly because it's no longer a top-down decision by a CEO or the PR department. A lot of Chinese firms are taking cue from the international firms in the early 2000s saying, hey, our employees really love these engagements. It's a way of building culture. So let's sprinkle it out a little bit. Let's let Beijing do something, Shanghai do something, Chengdu do something, that isn't necessarily top down, but is something that, from the bottom up can be celebrated at the top. So we're seeing probably budgets of anywhere from $1 million to 10 million from a philanthropic standpoint without a disaster, just regular, business as usual. But we're also seeing on the same side the infrastructure being built into these firms with the CSR managers, sustainability directors, the amount that they're putting into their CSR reports, that's also growing. That used to be non-existent. And now you'll see where they will spend for a consulting firm or hire a CSR director, who's a legitimate budget that a Westerner would pay for, a Western brand would pay for. And so in both areas, we're starting to see real commitment, we're starting to see real maturity, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the numbers are going higher, but it definitely means that the investments they're making are smarter and better placed.
Nikki Lindgren asks, if you could advise a slightly younger version of yourself, what would you have done differently? What would you have done the same?
That's a great question, Nikki, and it basically comes down to a few things. I think whenever you're starting a business, or profit or nonprofit, I think the hardest thing is figuring out what you should do yourself, what others should do, what's your business model. Like, there's so many questions involved. And I think the biggest mistakes I made were early on in my first business, where I basically thought I should do it all. I mean, if there's a mistake that I made strategically, is thinking I could do it all. I should code my own website, I should do my own accounting, I should do everything myself because it will save me $150, $500, $1,000. I would basically only put money into an accountant when it was forced upon me as part of an audit. And I think that this is one thing I did, was I didn't learn to focus on what I want to do or what my value proposition to the market is and build that up. That was probably the biggest mistake that I made, because it just slowed me down. Although I will say that I learned a lot through that process. I learned, how that process is done, and therefore it made it easier for me to manage. So in the short term, that was probably, it held me back, but in the long term, I think that there's definitely benefit. It really depends upon how you want to do it. But I definitely don't regret like the big things, like say moving to China, starting a nonprofit before I started my for-profit, choosing, like making the big decisions. Taking a $15,000 check and not taking it out for myself, but then giving it and hiring another person. Like, I don't regret or think I should change any of that. And especially given the information I had at the time. I mean, I was just, sometimes you you talk to one person who is vested in your success, like, a spouse or a family member or a really good friend or another entrepreneur, and they give you feedback, and that gives you the comfort you need to make a decision. And you shouldn't regret those decisions, even if they're the wrong ones. But sometimes maybe you should learn better about who to talk to about getting, say, advice. And this is something that I was definitely giving a really good piece of advice up front that helped me was, only talk to people who have a vested interest in your success, who would sacrifice a bit of themselves if you were to lose, or would feel bad if you lost, like really feel bad, like genuinely feel like, damn, I shouldn't have given that information. Or they celebrate the success. They're not supporting you, they're celebrating with you. And learn to listen to those people more and reach out to them more often. Which I guess, if I was to say, with respect to that, if I was gonna make any changes, be a little bit more open with people who you can confide in, like find those people if you need them. But don't rely upon them, because what I find, my own history, but also in watching other entrepreneurs, is when you're looking for other people to self-validate your ideas, it gets really tough, because then your confidence, if there's any dip at all, you second guess everything because you're not confident in yourself. And looking for confidence from other people, or from, rewards or awards or whatever, that becomes a really bad game that I've seen a lot of people really try and play through, and it's just challenging. So there's no right or wrong. I'm really happy with what I have participated in, the teams that I've built, the brands that have come out of that, the work that we've done. But there's nothing big that I would change. Little small things. Hire an accountant. Find somebody else to do my web design. Hire some interns who know about video when I don't know anything about video, but at the same time learning with and through them so that I can do better as this process goes on. So I know that probably answers your entire question, but at the same time probably doesn't answer anything that you were asking. But I really thank you for the question. So thank you. It gave me time to maybe put a few things in. But if you have like some specific questions about yourself, I'd be more than happy to help you kind of work through your own questions that you may have about how you go forward, because I know that you've got some big decisions coming up as well. So Nikki, thank you very much. Happy New Year. That wraps it up. We did our 4 questions as usual, and I hope that this format is working better for you or is providing more value somehow. Please keep asking questions. It doesn't have to be just about China. It can be about how you're doing business, the business response to an issue from an entrepreneur's perspective, or if you're just looking for a job. Please reach out, send us your questions in the comments or on any social media you're on using the hashtag AskTheCollective. As always, thank you very much and have a great week.